Good day. My name is Dr. Obinna Ebirim. I'm a medical doctor, public health physician, and health promotion specialist. Um, Today, we're going to discuss local vaccine production in Nigeria, the way forward. This slide would inform on um, the need for local vaccine production in low medium income countries and some of the decisions that inform um, what kind of vaccines to produce and what it takes to go into local vaccine production. Um, Please feel free to ask your question at the end of this presentation and send in your comments. Although this is tailored to Nigeria, but the content and information in this slide can also be used in other low medium income countries that are yet to begin um, local vaccine production or at the preliminary stages of producing vaccine locally. In the course of this presentation, we're going to look at, first of all, set the context by looking at the landscape, the history, the needs assessment, what are the strengths, opportunities, weaknesses, and threats in producing vaccine in Nigeria. And then we'll move forward to categorize vaccines in terms of uh, the various how best one can go into production starting with these vaccine groups. And then we'll look at the various models in terms of starting, how we can start. We'll look at what are the investment recommendation based on the various models and vaccine categorization. And then, depending on what choice, we'll look at what are the various dynamics that you need to consider before going to such investment. We'll close this presentation by suggesting next steps in the context of Nigeria and then appreciation and reference list would follow. So let's begin by setting the context. So, what is it about Nigeria? Um, Now, Nigeria is the most populous black nation in the world. It has over 200 million people and it's growing at a rate about 2.5% every year. So it's a large and fast growing population. And the birth cohort of about 7.3 million annually means that it's one of the big markets for vaccine because then you have to vaccinate this population. And yes, you know that there are routine immunization that is given to children between 0 to 15 months in Nigeria. So it's a huge population, and then it's also a huge market for vaccine. And there's effort to actively vaccinate this huge population. There's this routine immunization which I spoke about. New vaccines are planned to be introduced. There's also outbreak vaccination, usually when with the polio eradication and the polio outbreak. You have vaccination. Sometimes there is measles outbreak, and then there is mass vaccination, and then there's ongoing COVID-19 vaccination in Nigeria. So, given the population, a huge market, and then knowing that in Nigeria there's an active vaccination of this large population, thus there's a huge demand for vaccines in Nigeria. Um, Another important thing to note about Nigeria is that it's one of the largest economy in Africa. If you look at having a GDP of $514 billion, which is greater than the second largest Egypt with $394 billion in South Africa. But then, in terms of the standard of living, it falls short because it now has like a GDP per capita of 2097. That's when you compare the GDP with respect to the total population. So you see that the standard of living is quite poor compared to Egypt and South Africa with 590 $5,090. Um, Another also downside of is that health is not prioritized in terms of expenditure and budgetary allocation. The health expenditure per capita is about $84, and Nigeria is yet to achieve the 15% average declaration. Um, in some time ago, heads of state gathered in Nigeria and in Abuja, Nigeria, and declared that they are going to give 15% of their budgetary allocation to health. Some countries like Rwanda, Zambia, and some other countries in Africa has achieved this, but Nigeria is not has not yet achieved this. I think we are in Nigeria we are doing still below 6% or thereabout. So it shows that health is not prioritized in terms of expenditure, and given that it's expensive to produce vaccine, it's important to set this context so you understand there's a big market, but then government expenditure on health is quite low. You also, as an emerging farm market size, huge of growing, although some other countries have very bigger, but in Nigeria you have about $1.4 billion emerging pharmaceutical market size. Um, we there's a the Nigeria vaccine policy was recently launched in September, just a month ago, September 2021. And but then the main regulator NAFDAC has no um, medium level three, the ML3 maturity level 3 rather certification, and that is required for vaccine production. So it's important to give this context, and if this slide is to be adapted to other countries, it's important to know, okay, what's their regulator? Do they have the maturity level 3 certification that is required for local vaccine production? And then let's look at history of vaccine production in Nigeria. um, Nigeria is actively producing veterinary vaccine. They are the National Vaccine Research Institute in Plateau State. Initially, it had the same story with human vaccine production, but then there was renewed leadership, increased resource mobilization, proactive effort to build a capacity, and that has translated to vaccines being produced, used in Nigeria, and even exported to some African countries. Recently, there was a commissioning of a biosafety level 3 lab in that research institute. So, in terms of veterinary vaccine, Nigeria is currently producing veterinary vaccines. Um, the Then let's now go to the human vaccines. Nigeria has always, in the past, produced vaccines. As far as between 1947 and 1991, Nigeria produced at the Federal Vaccine Production Lab in Yaba, Lagos. Nigeria produced the vaccine for smallpox, yellow fever, and anti-rabies vaccine, and even exported to some African countries. But then in 1991, that lab was there was a planned renovation of the lab, which then led to its shutdown. And since then, Nigeria has not produced vaccine. However, there are two companies in Nigeria, the innovative biotech that is conducting research and development for HIV vaccine, and biovaccines, which took over the federal vaccine production lab in Yaba through a, a joint venture agreement with the federal government of Nigeria, um, and they are just doing pack and label in of vaccines. They've not started vaccine uh, um, real, more like research and development or the active ingredients production, or even feel to feel. So, but then between 2005 and 2011, now there have really been efforts to kind of restart local vaccine production. It's important to, while setting this context, to know this history. Between 2005 and 2017, federal government and me and Baker had a failed PPP, JPP, to revive the the Federal Vaccine Production Lab. Um, between 2014 and 2015, there were two, one in 2014, one in 2015. There were two national stakeholders roundtable on local vaccine production, and these roundtable recommended development of the vaccine policy and a business case um, for local vaccine production. Between 2015 and 2017, NIFT conducted a facility tour, landscape analysis, and attempted to develop a business case for local vaccine production with support from Federal Ministry of Health at a point, National Biotech Development Agency, and the UNICEF, but all that did not work out. Between 2017 and 2021, BioVaccines Nigeria Limited was now from following MOU signing and the Federal Executive Council ratification in 2017 and then board formation in 2019. But as we said earlier on, they are still at the stage of pack and label of vaccines and not active ingredient production or even the research and development. Following the COVID-19 pandemic and the associated nationalism and inequity between 2020 and this year, 2021, there was a launch and award of about over 200 million naira COVID-19 Research and Development Grant by the Central Bank of Nigeria. And then just last year in September 2021, the Nigeria vaccine policy was eventually launched, which was, as I mentioned earlier on, one of the recommendation from the National Stakeholder Roundtable that held between 2014 and 2015. So, what's the need for local vaccine production in a country like Nigeria and most low middle income countries? So, a top reason why there is such a sudden interest or a spike in interest is because of following the COVID-19 pandemic. It was observed that some of the rich countries with production capacity were holding up vaccines for their people. In fact, in some cases, third dose of vaccine was now being administered to some of the health workers, while less than 2% of other poorer countries are yet to get even the first dose. So there's a whole lot of that holding was really like a nationality, what a new term that came out that's known as vaccine nationalism, where people were looking more after themselves at the expense of other poorer nations. And this have a health security implication because then if there is an outbreak or pandemic, these poorer countries are not able to deal with it as quick as richer nations. So, and we know the role of vaccine in protecting against diseases and preventing death. So, in terms of ensuring that the health of their citizens are secured and not to be a victim of the vaccine nationalism and inequity, these low and middle income countries have begun to think about local vaccine production and then showing greater political will and in some case greater resource mobilization. Um, Also in Nigeria, there is Gavi is going to transit from funding of new vaccines and supporting vaccine procurement from by 2028. So there's a 10-year gradual transition, and with Gavi support, there is an agreement with the UNICEF to procure and bulk they at a cheaper price. And then there is also a particular criteria for farmers who UNICEF can procure from. So that in itself, although a positive one, but was a limitation in terms of manufacturers that can that governments who are under Gavi support can procure from. So, but then and we have had pharma companies that are trying to start up like the BioVaccines Nigeria Limited, giving that one of the reasons why they are holding on going into full vaccine productions because they are waiting for this transition. So the government of Nigeria will now have that primary responsibility to procure, and then they can now decide to either procure locally. So So yeah, so that's also one reason why there is not. So what then happens after 2028? So by 2029, Nigeria will have to be spending over $295 million in in vaccine procurement. So that is also a supply factor in this, a demand factor. So there will be that demand for it, and then it's an appetite for local vaccine manufacturers to then know that okay, there will be a market for if they go into such production. Um, other positive market trends that I've been seeing is that population in Nigeria is rising. Um, it's thought that it might even double by 2050. There are new vaccines that will even be developed that will be introduced into the country, and this vaccine, introducing new vaccine, means that there is also a demand for them. And Nigeria is yet to meet the 80 to 90% target. It's 5 to 90% target set for coverage at both national and the subnational level. It's still doing around the 50, between 50 and 60. So that means that there is still a market out there to meet. Um, there's also new technologies in terms of that's being now used for local vaccine production, which is increasing yield and reducing production costs. So these positive market trends are incentives for manufacturers to begin to think to or investors to then go into local vaccine production. Another factor is also the fact that there is a more supportive environment. So the World Trade Organization, the African Development Bank, even the local Central Bank of Nigeria are all now interested in funding local vaccine production, giving grants. So that's increased funding. It's something that gives appetite to local manufacturer. But it's important to point out that unlike the one-off grant that was given for local vaccine production requires sustainable funding, because then it requires a long-term investment and assured long-term assured investment. Another important thing is that you can see in the slide is that there's now an uh, regional solidarity to to produce vaccine locally and then procure for the entire region. So recently, the African Union and the African CDC launched a partnership for African vaccine manufacturing, and then set up the a group to drive that agenda. So this regional solidarity is important in terms of ensuring there is a bulk purchase, and which is also something that manufacturers are looking at before venturing into local vaccine production. So 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 we need to look at what are actually the strengths and opportunity for producing vaccine locally in Nigeria. Now, this is a map of Africa vaccine value chain players by country 2020, and you can see that in Nigeria, there are actually two manufacturers that have been listed, and it's very important because in the effort, the joint solidarity effort in the by the African Union, these are the recognized vaccine manufacturer. It's good that Nigeria is on this map. You can see that it's not all countries that are on this map. So it's important to know that Nigeria is one of the countries. It's one of the countries that have a local vaccine manufacturer. So that's a strength. I recently we talked about the earlier we talked about the vaccine policy that have just been launched, which is some of the one of the things stakeholders have asked that is required, because it then sets a guidance for vaccine production and more like an assurance for players who want to get into the sector. It's also uh, the policy also provides for the development setup of the vaccine governing council. So those are kind of the strengths that um, are valuable. Some of the things that are going for Nigeria in terms of local vaccine production. Um, Also, there are Nigerians outside Nigeria who are leading vaccine development for other international pharmaceutical companies, and it means that the capacity is there. It's just how do you then attract them and bring them back home. So this is also a strength that Nigeria has at the moment. um, what are those opportunities? So as you mentioned it earlier, Nigeria has a very large market. So in fact, it's one of the largest domestic markets for vaccines in Africa, and it's still growing. That's the exciting thing. And then we've talked about the increased political will and momentum in Nigeria, not just in Nigeria but in the African region. But then, what are the weaknesses and threats? Um, some of the weaknesses are policy infidelity. So there have been historical development of policies that are not kept, or laws that are not complied with and or enforced really. So that in itself is a weakness. So it then raises the doubt if there will be um, compliance with the national vaccine policy that's just developed, and if it's going to be implemented to its fullest. um, in other areas, both in the health sector and non-health sector, there have been cases of lack of accountability, inefficiency, and corruption. It's important that this is not brought into local vaccine production, because then that would affect the ability of it starting up in Nigeria. We also talk about lack of sustainable financing. Um, Also that the regulator, National Agency for Food and Drug Administration and Control in Nigeria, the NAFDAC, is yet to attain the maturity level 3 certification. And then there will be need to build capacity. There is really no local capacity at the moment to develop vaccine, unless it's going to be attracted abroad, because then there are no human vaccine development, but there are Nigerians who have gone abroad to acquire this knowledge, in terms of maybe having worked in the past or currently working with pharmaceutical companies out of Nigeria. So they'll need to build the capacity of those local, those in country, and then attract um, foreign capacity Nigerians outside, and also some experts who would come to help build the capacity and start up the process. Some of the threats, it's there have been little, more like foreign direct investment has reduced in Nigeria in recent times, so there's need to increase the appetite of foreign investors to come in and play in the sector. Um, there's also poor social infrastructure, so power is irregular, and setting up a lab in Nigeria for local vaccine will require constant power supply, right? Because of some of the materials, the lab might need to be kept in a particular temperature and all that, and if the investor is going to then be running his own power, will then develop his own, or more like, I would say, if he's then going to develop his own power supply really, and then it's going to increase operational cost. Then obviously, with Nigeria not producing vaccine, there are people who are benefiting from that old order. So as it is with every business, people who are benefiting from the order will want to uh, mount some resistance in terms of maybe anti setting a different agenda and causing unnecessary delay or disruption of the process. The other things that are of importance, and also that is competing for the scarce resources in Nigeria, things like the insecurity and the need to fund the military to fight that insecurity. With the COVID-19, the number of out of school girls, out of school children is increasing, and there's need to put more funds in education. There have also been a call to invest a lot in education. Then a chunk of the budget is now used for debt servicing because of um, debts that have accumulated over time, both debt incurred at the national and subnational level. So these are things that are also uh, competing for the scarce resources. Then political will. Nigeria will be going to having a national election in 2023, and there is likely going to be a change in leadership because this is the second and final term of the current administration. So with that change in government, it will be important that the this momentum that is building up now for local vaccine production is sustained, and that the new government now puts that down and begin to pursue a different agenda. So let's move forward then to the real vaccine production and look at the various dynamics and some of the information we need to know in terms of local vaccine production. So first of all, what we're going to do is to categorize vaccines to really, because then there are specific dynamics about these vaccines that affect decision to go into their production. So, in terms of categorization, we're looking at categorizing them based on the market dynamics, demand and supply, and the manufacturing complexities, right? In terms of how complex it to go into. So, we're going to look at the legacy expanded program of immunization routine vaccines, the ones that are usually given during the routine immunization program. The old ones more like at this legacy group. The expanding ones are more like the newer ones that are being introduced in some countries and or planned to be introduced. We have also those are the routine expanding EPI group. We have the Africa specific outbreak vaccines that are more like vaccines that are produced in response to emerging diseases or disease outbreak in Nigeria, like Ebola vaccine, the Rift Valley fever vaccine, and all the vaccines that are being developed or have been developed in response to African specific disease outbreaks. Then we have the novel vaccines. These are like the newer vaccines that are now coming up, like the COVID-19 vaccine, the HIV vaccine that is yet uh, to be introduced, the malaria vaccine that was recently approved for use. So these are the novel vaccines, and the dynamics differ for these various vaccines. So in terms of the first group, example is the BCG, measles, polio, yellow fever, more like the routine ones. You know, manufacturing complexities, you can see that it's low to medium, so they are quite easy to develop. But then one needs to look at what are the demand side issues. So they are they already have achieved high coverage, and then so the gap to fill is quite low in terms of the demand. So it's that reduces the demand. So these vaccines have been there, but then also another thing to look at that is not considered here is that the vaccines that are then like also like the routine expanding, they are given to children, more like is a routine vaccine. So it's given to, in Nigeria, at least the cohort of 7.3 million will have to be receiving it every year. So that is also a demand. The only problem is that for the legacy ones, the traditional ones, versus the newer vaccines or the expanding ones, the older ones have a greater coverage. So more children are taking it than the newer ones. Then, in terms of supply, they are produced in large quantity already by the Indian manufacturer at a low cost. So, if you're coming into this space for this vaccine, you need to then think, oh, can you match this production capacity that reduces the cost? Otherwise, after producing, there will be a greater appetite for the Indian manufacturers who are producing at a lower price because of they have high demand. So that's the dynamics that one needs to consider, market dynamics, and also more like the complexity is easy. The expanding group, they're a bit medium to high in terms of they're more difficult to produce than the
legacy group, but then they are they are not quite popular, and the market for it is not that much. So that's in terms of the supply for it. So there is still space to produce and then meet the increasing demand. Now the coverage is also increasing. It's being introduced in some other countries. Nigeria is trying to introduce Rota and HPV. So there is also an opportunity there um, in terms of supply, if you want to play and produce, and then you have the greater demand for it. The so example is the HPV rota. I've mentioned that the African specific outbreak groups. These are emerging vaccines. It's unpredictable how what the demand would be, because then it will become useful once uh, more like demand will increase with outbreaks, right? So, and then also it's important to note that there is also a supply issue, in the sense that large volume are often stored in global stockpiles. So, it's only when in an out in an outbreak, this supplies needs to then will be the first call before new vaccines are. But then it's also important that vaccine producers can also produce to meet the need of these global stockpiles, right? So that's something to look at in terms of demand and supply of the African specific outbreak vaccines. Then the novel vaccines, so most of them are, are now being developed. They not yet licensed product in development, which have the potential to become part of large scale immunization program. So there is a potential, like with malaria vaccine, there is a huge potential, but these are still not totally unknown. There's a lot of um speculations, and uh, things are not quite clear really with the nature of this vaccine, because they are being produced, right? So it's not really clear what the supply and demand dynamics would be until these vaccines are completely produced, and then um, one weighs the appetite of countries in terms of introducing it into their routine immunization program. So, based on these vaccines, then we'll look at the various models of local vaccine production. So, there's the downstream model that focuses on package and labeling or fill and finish steps for multiple products. So, as you can see, it covers both from the routine in terms of the recommendation, routine outbreak, novel and vaccine. One can also go into that um, for the legacy group, but then these vaccines are already produced at very high volume by the Indian companies at a very um, or developed countries vaccine group manufacturing players. That's the DCVMs. So, but then for downstream, it can go for all the groups, because then it's about producing just fill and finish or package and labeling, right? It's maybe the one that is most attractive for domestic market or for people who are about to start. Um, then there also the model of expanding routine, where you concentrate on focus on the expanding routine vaccines like the Rota, HPV, pneumococcal vaccine that have not been fully um, introduced in most of the countries. There's also the platform Leapfrog, and just to say that the Biovaccine Nigeria Limited are using a downstream model, while the innovative biotech company, the second company in Nigeria, is using the platform Leapfrog model. And the platform Leapfrog model
it focuses more on the novel and partly the outbreak, African specific outbreak group, vaccines groups, and then it may really provide more new opportunities um, to really play along these new vaccines and new technology, but then it requires disruptive, innovative technology for people who are going into it. So, but for most countries like Nigeria, they they might not have these disruptive, innovative technologies. So, they all fall basically in the category of traditional processes with incremental innovation, just little innovations here and there. But then with time, as they technology innovations advance and technologies advance, they can then go into the platform leapfrog model or the outbreak model. But it all depends on how you want to start. We have the outbreak model, um, both where you just focus on the African specific outbreak vaccines. Then we have the adjacency, model. You start with the adjacent products like the needles, syringes, uh, before you then migrate to local vaccine in terms of vaccine production. So those are kind of the various model, and to make a choice, really, it's you decide to say, okay, what category do you fall in terms of your level of technology and process innovation as a company or as a country that wants to go into vaccine production, and then what vaccines do you want to focus on in terms of, or you want to start with adjacent products like the needles, syringes. Yeah, so in terms of Nigeria, the recommendation would be to, like, what Nigeria falls more into, or its company falls more into traditional processes with incremental innovations. So the advice would be to then start with the downstream model or the expanding routine model, right? And then for some other countries to then expand to the outbreak model model. But then there is an opportunity for the legacy routine model, because then Nigeria has a huge market, and if there is an assurance of of that market, then that could also reduce the cost, the production cost per dose of the vaccine, and then you can then compete with the um, developed country manufacturing group. And then moreover, when you consider the fact that if you procure there, you have to transport it, and the transportation cost and all that, it then might be favorable to also play in this legacy group. Then for those who want to invest, um, there are various types of investors, and then you look at what would be the short-term investment opportunities and the long-term investment opportunities. We have the greenfield, those that have no experience. We have those, the brownfield, with existing experience, and then those with experience in adjacent products like the needle syringe. And these are the various advice that you can give. So for those with no experience, they can start with the downstream model, or in some cases, if they have disruptive technology, they can start with the platform leap model and then migrate to the expanding routine model and the outbreak model. Um, those with already existing that have started maybe with the downstream or the platform leapfrog model can then expand to the expanding routine model and outbreak model, and then from there go full stretch to even the novel vaccines. Um, then those with some other experience in terms of their protein syringes and needles can start with the downstream and then move over to the outreach model or the expanding vaccine routine model. So, so in terms of Nigeria, the specific recommendation is that for bio vaccine and the innovative biotech, they have they have experience. So this is a time for them to move into from their current downstream model and then begin to consider the expanding routine model and the outbreak model. In fact, they can even go in start with the legacy if they have the scope that reduces the cost, and also if they have the assurance of the demand in terms of the government of Nigeria buying of the vaccines. Then there are also about 11 companies who are into production of vaccine adjacent products like the needles vaccines. They could also start with the downstream model and then gradually move up to the either legacy, the outbreak, or um, the African specific vaccine model. So these are the various, depending on then the new companies needs to start maybe with a downstream model, or unless if they have the huge technology, then they can then do the platform different model like the innovative biotech companies doing in Nigeria. So um with this decision, depending on the decision that is taken, um basically for the ones not the ones with disruptive in technology. So narrowing down to where Nigeria falls into that, those with traditional with incremental innovation. So if you then decide to go into the downstream model with pack and label only, then the internal rate of return before tax will be about 30 to 15, 30-35%. The investment cost for just to build a site for it will be about $50 million. Then the net present value that is not researched after, that's the value of your entire asset after 10 years brought backwards would be about 50 to 60 $1 million. The risk in starting with this is low compared to others, and then the time frame for setting up is about 4 years. Now, if you want to go through the downstream model with fill and finish and packaging and labeling, you can see also 25 to 30. To set up a site is about $50 million, and then look at it, it's more riskier than this. So it goes on and on and on, even for those who want to do the leapfrog model with food domestic production, taking about $190 million, and then the value after 10 years, projected value after 10 about 170 to 210. But then it's very risky and all that. So it depends on the manufacturer and the investor, what's his risk appetite, and then where does he want to start, and what is he a brownfield company or a greenfield company. So these are the various dynamics that one can consider, the investor can consider before going to local vaccine production. So having gotten all this knowledge and what really is the next step, so he suggested that in view of the need and then the dynamics, government and partners should then leverage on the strengths Nigerian strength to begin local vaccine processes. Now it's something that needs to start even when you're starting with the downstream. It takes 4 years to set up, so it's good to start now. Um, then some of the weaknesses we've observed needs to be watched and prevented. Things like there must be local vaccine policy fidelity. One needs to comply with what the policy says and make sure that it's enforced. There should be effective leadership, sustainable financing. NAFDAC should obtain the maturity level 3 certification. There should be more investment in health, research, and development. And then efforts should be put in place to attract the required capacity for local vaccine production. We also need to stimulate investors, especially foreign direct investment into the country, increase developing infrastructure to support this industry, prioritize health security and also the related funding, and then watchful of the beneficiary to look at that because they might try to delay processes to continue to um, ensure that Nigeria procures through the old order. And then, even with the leadership change, the new government should make sure they are continuing with this policy so that the process that is starting would continue. Investors should then leverage on the opportunity to invest in Nigeria or sustainably fund. The word is sustainably, it's not just a one off investment. We can see a good start by BioVaccine, Nigerian Limited Innovative Biotech, but then they should consider transiting to to more like other levels of vaccine, but not just the fill and finish downstream model to then go into the expansion legacy or even the expansion, the legacy routine, and then the outbreak models. 11 companies producing injectables should also consider starting a downstream model and transitioning into the outbreak or even routine. Newer companies should also continue starting with either downstream or leapfrog. And then there should also be need to develop the investment case that will attract. That's one of the ways to attract foreign investment because they will then know what's the investment case in playing in the local vaccine production space. Uh, yeah, although not advised, but one we should then need to in country review the potentials of starting with the legacy routine vaccines, and then in terms of okay, if you compare the cost of moving this vaccine in country, if you compare um, this scale that is required in country and the buy off, would that make more sense to even start with this legacy ones that are given up to about 7 million, ought to be given up to 7 million children annually. So basically, these are the suggested next steps for both the government partners and investors. So thank you for listening. Um, the This is the reference document that I used in developing this slide. I would want to thank the CVMN for their efforts in making some of this analysis that was used in developing this slide. And also, thank you everyone for listening. I'll be looking forward to receiving your comments, questions, and on this, feel free to ask your questions. As I said, this is more like a high level presentation for those who are interested in local vaccine production. So, thank you for listening, and bye bye.